Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Arcwood Mastery session. We're recording this today and we're hosting this meeting on September 26, 2024. But some of you might be watching this later. This presentation is offering SHRM continuing education credits, and I think that is appropriate given its human resources manager day. So we have holidays for everything, and I'm sure we definitely appreciate you folks, and so does your employer and your employees. So hopefully today, on this grand holiday, we could provide a little bit of education for you on some basic 401k compliance things that most of you have probably come across before, but maybe didn't really understand what the process was for doing it. And hopefully in the future, we'll help you streamline that a little bit. Get to my next slide here. My name is Brandon Oliver. I work with Arcwood Financial, one of the divisions at Arcwood. I am a 401k advisor and a 401k consultant. So what that means is the hat I wear is generally helping plan sponsors, investment committees, monitor their 401k plans, specifically the investments that are in those plans, as well as providing education and advice to their plan participants. We also work as consultants where we work with business owners, executive teams, investment committees to really just review plan design options, as well as maybe platform decisions. With me today, I have Mike Lee. Mike is with Matthews Gold, Kennedy and Snow, MGKS. They are third-party plan administrators. And in Mike's role there, he is also a plan design consultant, specifically focusing on helping business owners and executive management create plans or to come up with solutions to help the plans operate more efficiently for their goals, right? If the goals are increasing tax deductions, increasing participation, increasing participant deferrals, things of that nature. We work with MGKS a lot, in conjunction with whatever platform provider the plan may be wanting to work with. Mike, did you have anything else you wanted to chime in there on your company's services?
No, that was an accurate summation of who we are and what we do.
All right, good. I'm glad I got it now. It only took 15 years. So we're going to start off with just some plan basics, right? So we're recording this in the year 2024. So contribution limits have gone up a little bit. For 2024, the contribution limits for 401ks is 23,000. And then for those that are age 50 or over, it would be 30,500. I think those numbers are kind of flip-flopped right there, right? It's supposed to be 23,500 and then 7,000. Is this transposed? Possibly. Also, starting next year, it's just appropriate for, I think, everyone on this call to realize that those catch-up contributions are actually going to go up. Secure 2.0 added a new tier of catch-up contributions for participants that are a little bit closer to retirement. So for those participants that are age 60 to 63, there's going to be an additional catch-up contribution that's available for them. And that's either going to be $10,000 or 150% of whatever the catch-up contribution is at that time. So definitely keep an eye out on that. You should be talking to your record keepers, your advisor, and your TPA consultants to make sure you're aware of that, because that will definitely help your older participants put a lot more away for retirement. Also, from a testing perspective, I'm already going into the weeds here. Catch-up contributions really help when it comes to year-end compliance testing. If you are failing your ADP or your ACP test, those contributions are usually outside of those calculations. So historically, if you failed those, you have highly compensated employees that aren't able to defer what they want, and they are over age 60. All of a sudden, they're going to have a good chance to start getting in those contributions. Maybe they wanted to for a while.
And for anyone doing the math, the 150 is the greater of the two figures right now with that 7,500 catch up. I haven't seen the catch up go down, so why that 10,000 is even in there to begin with is beyond me. But basically, it's 150% of that catch up, which for right now is 11,250. And why it stops at 63 is also beyond me. But it's just one of those provisions that Congress decided to put in there for those that select range of ages.
Yeah, great. So yeah, it will be a little bit higher than that 10,000. Secure 2.0 was written when the catch-up contributions were probably a little bit lower. So now 150% would be more, right? 11,250.
Yeah, if they were looking at 2022's limits, that would be 9750. So fair point, because this was in 2022 and Secure 2.0 was passed.
Great. Well, something to be aware of, right? You'll definitely start to get notices, and that's what that's all about. A new tier of catch-up contributions for those people that are a little bit older, 60, 61, 62, and 63. So one of the main areas we wanted to talk about today were contributions, right? We're going to spend a lot on contributions themselves. What to do with late contributions is going to be a main focal point of this presentation as well, and how to correct those. But let's just start with 401k contributions. So this is something where we kind of see there's some misinformation out there and some misunderstanding when it comes to when do you need to make those contribution files into the 401k following payroll. And what the rule states is employers must deposit employee contributions, including loan payments, as soon as administratively possible. So there's a lot of misinformation out there where people think, oh, well, I'm a small plan, so I can make contributions to the plan up to 15 days later, right? Or there's another number that floats around sometimes, up to 7 days. That's actually not how it's defined in DOL regulations. It's defined as they will be determined if those are timely contributions based on the past performance of actual deposit timing for the plan. So what does that mean? What they're going to look if you have an audit, knock on wood, right? Or if something comes up with the plan, and if historically you've always made your deferral files, your contributions to the 401k within 3 days, right? And then all of a sudden something messes up, maybe due to a record keeper switch or something of that nature, and you miss a full contribution by 2 weeks or 10 days, there is no safe harbor there for like 7 days late or 15 days. You're like, oh, we're fine. We're at 10 days versus I heard it was up to 15 days. No, the DOL will actually say, well, historically, you've always made contributions within 3 days. So you're now expected to maintain that behavior moving forward. So that means your contributions are simple math. I went to state school, right? But you're 7 days late with your contributions there. So please just understand that if you are making contributions and they are later than you generally make them, then you are going to have late contributions, and you will have to follow through with some kind of correction process for those missed contributions, those late contributions, and the earnings and or penalties and fees that would be associated. Is that decent for you, Mike? Any commentary there?
Yeah, no, I agree. You're setting your own precedent. So if you're very consistent with that, that's going to be the ruler against they use to measure your timeliness of it. So set yourself up for success when you're getting these plans off the ground.
So let's say this does happen, right? You make a contribution that's 10 days later than you normally make those contributions. What should you do? Well, number one is, oh, Mike, what are we going to do? We're going to do this guy's face. I don't know what I'm going to do. But what we do, yeah, good. Yours is good. As soon as you realize that deposits are late, submit those late contributions. Like what we see a lot of people do is, oh no, I messed up. I didn't use the right definition of compensation, or we somehow the payroll file for the employer contribution didn't go through. We're 2 weeks late. Whatever happened, right? The first thing you want to do is go into your record keeper system and correct those contributions. Get them in as soon as possible, or get the correct version in if there was any miss there. What you don't do is you say, oh no, I have a problem. Let's put this on the back shelf. I'm sure I'm going to have to get an ERISA attorney involved. I'm going to have to call my TPA at MGKS. I'm going to have to email Brandon again, or whoever you're working with, right? That's not what you want to do. What you want to do, number one, right away, is get that contribution in, or any portion of that contribution that was incorrect. After that is when you can start looking at, well, what are my corrective measures for the fact that I was late or inaccurate with that contribution? But number one, get those contributions in, because all of these fees or these penalties or missed earning calculations, they're all tracking from that day it became late. And if you procrastinate on that issue a month, 6 months, till the end of the year when your auditor's talking to you about it, that's going to be a much bigger number. So what we want people to do is right away get those contributions in.
Stops the clock, just like you said.
Yeah. So, okay, so we got our contribution in, but we know we were late or there's some kind of error on it. What are my options for fixing these late deposits? So there's really two main paths we can go down. One is called self-correction, and the other is called the Voluntary Fiduciary Compliance Program, or the acronym for that is VFCP. Historically, we've seen most plans are doing the VFCP. Today, my high level advice, I mean, again, I can't give direct compliance advice to you or legal advice or tax advice on a presentation like this. This is educational, but we really think a lot more people should at least be looking at the self-correction option. Big picture, something happens and you reach out to your record keeper about it, they're not going to tell you what to do, right? They're going to say, hey, you have two options. And read this PDF we have on the options and decide what's best for your plan. But we're going to get into the weeds a little bit more on it. So let's start with the VFCP. I'm going to start in the right column and move left. Right, the VFCP has an application that goes to the DOL. Now that application, I'll tell you a little bit more about the type of things that need to be in that document, but they don't really require their own form. So your record keeper will probably have a form for you to fill out, and that's what's needed, and they send that on to the DOL on your behalf. After you do the application, well, not after, but what else you have to do is you have to fund corrective earnings using either the DOL calculator or the greater earnings calculation, right? So what we see a lot of times is most people will just use the DOL calculator. And really what the DOL wants us using is the plan's rate of return, right? Use the greater of. Are you using the DOL calculator or are you using the plan's rate of return? You're supposed to use the greater of these two numbers. So VFCP process makes you make contributions for the missed earnings on those late contributions. The VFCP doesn't generally have the 15% transaction excise tax that you have to calculate on self-correction, but we'll go over this in a minute because there's some other reliefs here too. VFCP requires a notice goes to your participants, and if your application is approved, with the VFCP, you get what's called a no action letter, possibly if they approve what you did to correct the measure and that you did all the processes right. And what that means is the plan fiduciaries get fiduciary relief from any breach they may have done in the plan. On the other column, with self-correction, we don't get one of those, right? So with self-correction, there's actually no application or letter that goes off to the DOL about the correction process. Now, corrective earnings, same deal, right? You're going to want to use the higher of the DOL calculator or plan's actual earnings. Regarding plan's actual earnings, like, well, what are those? How do I know what those are? Any record keeper will be able to tell you what the plan's earnings were from date X to date Y, right? So you're talking to your service provider and you say, hey, we are 10 days late with our contribution. Can you tell me what the plan's rate of return was from September 1st to September 10th? And they'll give you a percentage-based cumulative rate of return for the plan, and that's what you would apply to those missed earnings there. You compare it against the DOL calculator, though, to see if that's higher, and 9 times out of 10 plus, the greater earnings are always going to be higher, and that's going to be what you want to use. Unfortunately, though, we see most plans just always go and use this DOL calculator, right? Even when they're working with their record keeper, because not all record keeper service providers or administrators really know the rules on this. So I know this is a lot to remember. It already feels like drinking through a fire hose, but like if you need to remember something here, it's that you're supposed to be using their plan's rate of return, not just some arbitrary calculator on the DOL website. With self-correction, there is a 15% prohibitive transaction tax. So that is included when you do your year-end tax filing, Form 5330. There's no participant notice involved. You don't have to send anything out to the participants. But in this case, you do not get a letter from the DOL, right? There is no fiduciary protections. If, God forbid, the plan had an audit and the DOL came in and they look at the process you did to correct any mistake that was made and they don't like it, they could still take further measure. But if you're following all the correct procedures, which are exactly, probably pretty close to the VFCP, you're going to be fine. They're going to be like, oh, you did everything that you should do, right? You use the plan's actual rate of return. You paid the excise tax as part of your tax filing. You documented the mistake and what you're doing to fix it in the future. You'll be fine. I know that was a lot, but what are some of the things I missed there, Mike?
No, I think you've touched on it, and anything that you may have glossed over at a little bit high level, we're going to get into in the upcoming slides as well, the details of the self-correction, and like you said, a little bit more information, meat and potatoes on that DOL application for those who haven't gone through that.
All right, so self-correction. We're staying in self-correction. If we want to use acronyms, we can call it the SCP, but that's just because we're in finance and we use way too many acronyms, right? But you can use the self-correction process to fix any insignificant operation errors at any time, generally up to 3 years, to preserve the tax favored status of your plan. So big things you need to know with the self-correction process, right, is document. Right? Document everything you do. And I'll just follow what you would be doing in the VFCP, right? To say what happened, how did we fix it, right? How did we make corrections for any late contributions? And just document that you now have policies and procedures in place to monitor this going forward, right? So document that, put that in your fiduciary file, but also send a memo to someone else on your team, actually documenting that in stone and like, hey, we all know what happened here. Here's how we fixed it. This is how we're gonna continue to manage to a correct standard moving forward
And just a quick clarifier on that, Brandon, policies and procedures are necessary to be eligible to self-correct. So you want to have those in place so that you can then self-correct. And part of that memo as part of your self-correction program is identifying kind of where the error occurred and then how you're changing the already established policies and procedures so that it doesn't happen again. So it's not just, hey, I'm choosing to fix this and now I'm going to put in road barriers so that it doesn't happen again. You need to have those in place and then identify why those failed and then tweak them so that it doesn't occur again.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, definitely you want to have policies and procedures on your plan. I already mentioned this. How far back can it go? Generally about 3 years is the correction period. If you find you made a late contribution up to 3 years ago, or you missed maybe the employer contribution on something, you usually have 3 years. You can go past the 3-year mark. You just might want to talk to counsel about that because it's kind of vague terminology. They call it significant versus insignificant errors. And if it's generally a small amount, right, maybe didn't affect a lot of participants, it happened once and it was corrected right after, or it was corrected as soon as you found that the mistake was starting to happen, that would be considered insignificant. If they are large amounts and they continue to happen over and over again, even though you were aware of the issue, then you're probably falling into the camp of significant. And if you're past 3 years, you might not be able to use the self-correction process. You'll probably want to do the formal process of doing an application to the DOL.
And on that front, what the IRS is, what we're seeing a lot more of these days is they're really encouraging folks to use more of that self-correction program. But besides just that 3-year correction period, the other kind of timeline you want to keep in mind is from when you identify the failure, whether it's a failure you've been doing wrong for 10 years or something you just you've only messed up recently. From when you identify, you want to make sure it's corrected in whole within 18 months. So you don't want to identify something and then take a really long time to correct it. Once you find the mistake, you really want to jump on it and correct it as soon as you can. But just kind of reading the tea leaves, the IRS has been kind of expanding this self-correction program, just for one side, so that they have less applications to process. So it's easier on the plan sponsor. The more they can self-correct, that the less they have to reach out to the DOL, the less employees they have to staff to process all of those deals. And so we're seeing kind of a shift in the waters, if you will, towards that. But that doesn't mean that the VFCP is or the VCP is outdated, or that it's no longer in use, because there's going to be times when you want to go through that application, you're going to want that letter in hand of no action. You're going to want that formal blessing, especially if you're going through a merger or acquisition. So both programs are still going to be running, side by side going forward. You just might see a little bit more shift for what plan sponsors are choosing to do, depending on what it is they're correcting and going through for them.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. There are circumstances where you might want to do the formal application process, just like Mike said, especially if you have a new buyer coming in and they're concerned about maybe some errors that were brought up in a meeting. They'd rather have the letter in hand. But really, self-correction is going to be a lot easier for you as an HR professional or a controller or a business owner. And that process is available because not only is it easier for you, but it's actually taking some stress off of the DOL as well. Okay, the VFCP application process, right? You fill out this form. I think we have a slide about everything that needs to be in it, but the VFCP application process actually has a fee involved, as in self-correction doesn't, right? Self-correction, you have that 15% excise tax on whatever those late contributions and missed earnings were, right? With the VFCP, you pay an application. It's based on assets. So if your plan has less than $500,000 in it, the fee's $1,500. We're talking about, that's a $10,000 mistake if we're comparing apples to apples. But if your plan's larger, right, the application fee can be $3,500. Most likely, one late contribution or a couple late contributions or in the missed earnings on that 15% excise tax is going to be a lot less than 3,500. So generally, we see there's cost savings when you go through self-correction as well.
And this is intentional on their part as well. They raise the fees to discourage participation in that, to lean more towards the self-correction.
I think I touched on this, but this is the type of things that a VFCP application is going to say. And I said before, most likely you're not really using the DOL's application. You're probably using a form that's provided by your record keeper. But the type of things that they're going to be asking you for, and the same type of things you should be documenting if you're just doing a correction process yourself, are the list of people materially involved, information about the plan sponsor, right? Their EIN, their address, who the plan administrator is. When did the breach happen? An explanation of how the breach was corrected, by whom. How did you determine how you're calculating those missed earnings, right? Did you do the calculator, or did you use plan's actual rate of return? Was that the higher one? And then supporting documentation, right? Such as the data feeds that went up, the contribution file that was used for the missed earnings, things of that nature. Really, it's just document. The VFCP will show you exactly everything they need on it, but kind of follow the same kind of process and document those in your funds. So best practices, right, for participant contributions and loans. Mike already, number one, you have policies and procedures, right? Number two, you need to make sure you know who's assigned to do what. Who in the office is responsible for remitting contributions, right? Who is the backup for that person if they're out? Who's in charge of taking participant questions? Things of that nature. So potential consequences, really, if you're doing self-correction or your plan falls in the ability to do the VFCP, then then you kind of know what they are, right? One is you're going to have to do lost earnings for any period of time that those contributions were late, right? If you're doing self-correction, you're going to have that excise tax. If you're doing the VFCP, right, you're going to have the fees for using that program. And if your application is denied by the DOL for the VFCP, you could see civil penalties in any of these cases, and they can be up to 20% of the recovered settlement. Legal action, really, that would be if an employee sues an employer for breach of fiduciary duty, and that's going to come with its own legal fees and any kind of restitution that the court places on them. But if you can show that you followed correct procedures in correcting these things anyhow, right? Like using self-correction or using VFCP, that court case is going to go much differently. So as long as you're following the right procedures, and even if there is a mistake, there's procedures in place for you to easily correct those. Really, the legal action side of it probably shouldn't come up whatsoever. All right, so
and just to put a pin on that one, we've really talked about kind of three different tiers of fixing the problem. You've got tier one, which is like self-correct. Hey, I'm going to do it myself. I'm not going to submit anything. I'm just going to pay my penalty tax, fix the problem, wrap it up. Kind of the next tier down is the VFCP, where you're actually going to the DOL. Hey, I'm submitting it to you. I'm going to pay an application fee. We're going to get that letter back. That's I identified it, and I want to make sure you're aware so that we're both in agreement that we're doing this correctly. A little bit more guidance, a little bit more comfort there with a little bit of reassurance. And kind of that third tier is, the worst case would be those civil suits and the court, but really a lot of the times the third tier is going to be under like the case of an audit where they're actually saying, hey, we're identifying this thing. You didn't self-correct it. You didn't submit it to us for correction. Now the penalties are going to be steep because we're catching you under audit. And then that's kind of like the worst case scenario. But then you're dealing with the auditor and figuring out, okay, what are we going to do to negotiate an agreement? How do we come up to a solution? But it's not typically going to be as cheap as if you were to just fix it yourself or submit it to them for fixing under the VFCP. So you really want to avoid getting to that third tier underneath an audit, because typically the ramifications of the penalties are going to be much more severe.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Mike. It's all about trying to be proactive with these corrections instead of having an auditor come in. I mean, knock on wood, Mike and I are both in downtown Phoenix area. We service plans all over the state, some plans outside of the state, but generally Phoenix is a small market town, right? Smaller plans as compared to maybe the coasts, right? And you don't see as many 401k audits for smaller plans. But what you need to be aware of is if there's ever a complaint about the 401k, the DOL is going to come in. Also, if there's a complaint about payroll or other health benefit plans or group benefit plans, when a DOL auditor comes in, a lot of times they'll cross audit, right? So you got to complain about your health plan, but they're like, while I'm here, let's talk about your 401k. So it's always good to correct your own issues before any auditor walks into the door, because the fees and the penalties are going to be much more muted than if an auditor gets to determine what your penalties are. So let's talk about participant and beneficiary notices. So 401ks require a myriad of different notices to plan participants and their beneficiaries. And these include things like the summary plan description, SMM's summary of material modifications. So let's say you amend your plan, right? We have some new definition of the employer contribution, which happens a lot, or different eligibility requirements, things of that nature, or just any other provision changes you might make. Participants need to be notified about that. Your safe harbor notices, right? If you're doing an employer contribution that is defined as a safe harbor, either the safe harbor match or the non-elective or one of the QACAs, you have to send that notice to your participants. If you have automatic enrollment, that's another piece of paper or another notice that has to go to participants. And last but not least are the annual fee disclosure notices that need to go to participants. So all of these different documents need to be delivered to participants generally on an annual basis. And where we see the confusion comes in, or what a lot of plans don't understand, is who's in charge of what, right? Is the third-party plan administrator, a company like MGKS, are they distributing all of our notices for us? Is our record keeper, right? Fidelity or Vanguard or whomever, are they distributing the notices to our participants? Or are we, as the sponsors, supposed to be doing these ourselves? And usually it's a mix of all of the above. And unfortunately, not every provider, not every plan is the same, right? You could have 4 different plans with Fidelity, and they're all different. In one case, Fidelity is doing all the notice delivery. In another case, they're doing half of them, and the sponsor is supposed to be doing half. In another case, they're doing 2. MGKS is doing 1, the sponsor is doing 1. So what I'm trying to say, big picture here, is this is something you need to look into. This would be an email from you to your account managers with your TPA, as well as your record keeper, which is your plan provider, and say, hey, what are all of our annual notices, and which ones are we supposed to be delivering, and which ones are you delivering for us? Because a lot of times you'll just see this email come from your provider saying, it's time for the safe harbor notice to go out. And you might just assume that's something they're doing, but they're actually telling you, hey, you're supposed to be doing this. So I think it's good for anyone who is in an administrative role for a 401k at a corporation to maybe do a quick review of this and write it down so you know, oh, throughout the year, I do have to do a couple of different things. Mike, did you have anything else on that?
That's what I was going to add. Besides just identifying responsibility, I identify timeliness. As you know, some of these notices are annual, some of them are quarterly. Figure out when you actually have to be doing them. You know, if a participant becomes eligible and you have 90 days to do that, make sure you get it done within those 90 days. And then just the form of notice delivery, whether you're sending out via email, you know, is this going to be a participant that has a work email that uses their email every single day? Is it reasonable that they're going to be able to see that, or are you just posting it on bulletin boards? So there's different notice requirements that are probably beyond the scope of this presentation. But as you're inquiring about, is this my responsibility to actually distribute it? If it is, find out when you have to distribute it and how you can distribute it, and so that you can make your life, you know, administratively easier without violating any of those rules, and actually ensuring that the participants get the notice so that they can see it and fulfill your requirement there.
And yeah, that's a great point, Mike. Like, what's the format, right? So a lot of companies, they don't have corporate emails, but if they can show that there's a history of using a personal email for work correspondence, you're probably fine. But with a terminated participant, you know, do you still have that? No, you'll probably have to do mail. Another point is also when you're looking into this, and I think this is something all plan administrators should be looking into, right? If you don't like the response you get, like, oh no, you're supposed to be doing all of them, right? Or something like that. Just ask, say, oh, do you have an additional service where you will take care of all these notices or this notice or that notice on our behalf? And generally the answer will be yes. They'll say, yeah, we just charge you for the cost of mailing and another $1 per year per participant or something like that. So if you don't like the responses, ask your TPA if that's something they'll do, or ask your record keeper if that's something they would do on your behalf. And the answer will probably be yes. But don't assume it's being done, because a lot of base packages, right, might not have that. We already talked about all the different types of notices that could be included in these. So let's talk a little bit about employee status and eligible compensation. And I've talked way too much already, I know that. So Mike, I'm gonna let you take this slide and just kind of pick what you think's really important right now or relevant.
Yeah, so generally when you've got a 401k, everyone is going to be roped under it and given the opportunity to participate. But a lot of the times you're going to have a plan document that might have a requirement that says you need to be with the company for at least 30 days or 90 days or 6 months. The most that you can, or the longest you can keep someone out under those provisions for a 401k plan is going to be 12 months of 1,000 hours. with entry dates at least twice a year, semi-annual, usually the first of the year, and July 1st is a good example of what we see there underneath the longest parameters allowed. Now you can have more liberal eligibility than that. You can have them coming in sooner. And just because you typically will cover everyone doesn't mean that you have to cover everyone. So especially as you get into the bigger companies, you can have classifications where, say, salesmen aren't included, but the admins are, or we're going to cover the employees of our, like I said here, like in the Alabama office, but not the Louisiana office. So you can have different kind of carve outs or exclusions based on your business desire. Now you're going to want to work with your TPA to make sure that you pass all of the required coverage testing and that it checks all the boxes. But what the IRS wants to make sure is that you're doing this reasonable classification and you're not just saying, well, we're going to cover Johnny, but we're not going to cover Susan. It's like, all right, well, they're both in the same department. Like you can't just like carve out Susan. What they're also directing towards with these part-time and seasonal workers that we've got highlighted there on the page is the IRS wants to give more and more Americans the opportunity to save. And so the reason they use this verbiage is that whether an employee is part-time or not is very subjective. You could say part-time is 15 hours a week. You could say part-time is 30 hours a week. It could be 5 hours a week. Like, so what they say is that you've got to build in these parameters so that you're not impermissibly excluding certain folks. So they're trying to work with the employers going, all right, I know it may not be practical to cover everyone. Let's figure out how we can do this fairly so that we can get the most amount of people in to be given the opportunity to save for retirement. And so that's really what they're trying to get there. That's their motivation behind their rule. So if you're wanting to figure out kind of the right balance there between bringing everyone in versus making everyone wait a year, and maybe there's some happy medium in between, work with your plan document providers, your TPAs on that initial plan design, so they can talk to you about what's allowed and what's not allowed, and kind of keep you inside of the rules in regard to eligibility.
Right. So that's exactly it. So you can exclude or change eligibility and all the examples Mike said, but like one of the biggest things we see is people thinking they can just use their own definition of a part-time employee. Like, oh no, those people work part-time, or those people were seasonal, so we don't let part-time people participate in the 401k. And the DOL defines part-time much differently than you as a business owner or an HR manager might be doing it. And what the real definition is a year of service is generally 12 consecutive months period in which an employee was credited with at least 1,000 hours. Right, that's less than half time. Right, if we're looking at actual hours in the month, right, or in the week. So most of the time, and a lot of times people think part-time is, half hours, right? So it's actually much lower threshold than that. And you need to make sure that you're checking against the 1,000-hour rule versus your own definition of eligibility.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, read the documents. It's going to tell you how the hours are counted. It might be elapsed time. Generally, you're going to get credit for an hour of pay if you were paid for that hour. So that might include sick time, vacation time. So really look into that and make sure that you're reporting your hours accurately, so that the determination of whether someone has crossed that threshold is satisfied. And a lot of the times as well, that 1,000-hour mark is going to start when an employee is hired. So if you hire someone in September, they're going to determine whether they work 1,000 hours between September of 24 and September of 25, even though you're probably just looking at like January to December hours. So there's different measurement periods for eligibility, and sometimes it shifts. So plan document's going to dictate all that. That's going to be your comfort zone for where to go when you're not sure.
Yeah, great. And then also, one of the biggest changes we've seen to eligibility came with the Secure Act. And did we want to talk a little bit about this long-time versus part-time employees?
Yeah, I'll touch on it real quick. Kind of going back to that incentive from Congress, they want Americans to be able to save, and for a long time, you'd have these folks that work in 15 hours a week that never cross that 1,000 hours, and they're not given that opportunity to save. And so what Congress said is, if you've got someone that is more than 500 hours, assuming your plan has that 1,000 hour restriction or something where they wouldn't otherwise be eligible, once they hit 2 years in a row of 500 hours or more, you're going to have to give them that opportunity to contribute to the 401k. Now, if you're making matching contributions, profit sharing contributions, top heavy contributions, whatever, they're still going to have to meet the regular eligibility in order to be and eligible for those additional contributions. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have to start giving them all these company matched funds. All it means is you're going to have to give them the opportunity to defer out of their W-2 if they want to for those part-timers. And whether they do or not is to be determined. It used to be a 3-year threshold starting from 2021. So if you were in 2021, 22, and 23, you would now have to be eligible to put into your 401k. They've shortened that to 2 years starting next year. So to really incentivize that participation. So it's the idea is more folks are going to be eligible to participate. So therefore more folks will participate. And to some degree, I'm sure that'll probably pay out. How much is to yet to be seen.
And, this is only really going into effect just for people who are taking this or watching this for CE credit, right? This is only going to affect those plans that have more liberal definitions of their eligibility periods, right? If your eligibility is at day one or first paycheck or 2 months, right? This isn't going to affect you. This is really going to affect those plans that are saying 1 year of service for eligibility. If you're before that, or even before half a year, this isn't going to affect you. You're always making those people eligible. And with dual eligibility, even if it's 1 year for an employer, that doesn't affect us either. So if you're under a year of eligibility, or if you're at 2 months or 3 months, you're okay here.
And you're seeing some folks amend their plans to that so that they don't have to worry about this. They're going, all right, if we're going to have to start doing this, let's just kill the 1 year eligibility altogether. And if that's something that you're wanting to do, talk to your plan document provider, and they'll put through the amendment to make that happen. So that is something we're seeing. Just keep in mind, if you're doing that, you're sometimes making them eligible for that company match as well. So there's the ramifications and pros and cons of keeping the 1 year versus not keeping the 1 year. If you're concerned with that, if you're just looking at ease of administration, that's one of the pros to a more liberal eligibility than what's allowed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, oh, this seems hard. This seems like another thing I have to do at the end of the year. Fine, change your eligibility. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that. All right, so time eligibility versus compensation. Now we're talking about compensation. This is another problem we see a lot, especially with, I'm sure all of you noticed, it felt like the last 2 years, right? Your audits got a lot more difficult, right? If you have over 100 or 120 employees and you're doing long form 5500s and therefore a CPA auditor is auditing your 401k, it seems like all of a sudden a lot more dead bodies were found, right? And that's really because the amount of things that are required for auditors to sample and look into has increased significantly since 2022. So what we're seeing is a lot of plans are finding out, oh, we've been running payroll or deferral files based on one definition of compensation, but our plan document or our plan joiner agreement or adoption agreement has a completely different definition. And now we're having to look back and make missed earnings on missed contributions. So if this hasn't come up for you, it might, right? And so that's why we're saying another piece of advice today is do some kind of audit on your definition of compensation, right? Talk to your payroll vendor and see what numbers they're using, and then talk to your plan administrator or plan record keeper and see what definition they're using. A lot of times we see, a plan excluded bonus pay, right? They're like, oh, our employees when they get bonuses, they like to get all that in cash, right? They don't want that going into the 401k. Okay, if that's how you're doing it, but is that how your document is written, right? Also, things like severance and overtime. You might just assume, oh, these things are or not included. You want to do at least a spot audit on all of these things to make sure your deferral files, right, the way you're doing payroll is lining up with what your document says. And the only way to do that, again, it's just an email, right? So you can ask the questions so you can document that and have those in your policies and procedures.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, as a TPA, we're gonna ask for payroll reports and copies of W-2s to verify as well, just because it is the number 3 thing that the IRS sees gets messed up the most. So while we encourage you to get as great of an understanding of this as you can, we know that you're not experts, and we just blindly rely on you to send us what you think compensation is. We're gonna do our due diligence and double check that against the document. And one quick note on here, I like box 5 of the W-2, but that's also why we ask for copies of the W-2 so we can review it. You're gonna see a lot of language out there about box 1 of W-2, which is sometimes referenced on the IRS website. The caveat there is a lot of times if they're referencing box 1, they'll say, hey, it's box 1, and then you manually have to add back in any pre-tax deferrals. So box 5 picks those up automatically, which is why it's sometimes a little bit more accurate if you're trying to pick a number off of the W-2 to give to someone. But yeah, there's a lot of more payroll integration now and different softwares and companies talking to each other. So make sure that they're set up to pull the right information in and give it a good audit and get a good expert pair of eyes on there to give yourself a little bit more defense against an audit or against someone coming in there and potentially seeing the wrong comp being used.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. We had a decent sized plan that decided to add an employer contribution, a safe harbor employer contribution for the first time. And they all of a sudden they started doing that. And then at the year, halfway through the year, they realized, well, we're not withholding for bonuses. And that's how their old document was written. But as soon as they became a safe harbor plan, safe harbor requires you to use the wages as well as bonuses. So they had to actually update their processes per their safe harbor, and they never did. So things change over time too. And that's why you want to make sure, at least maybe if you looked at this 3-5 years ago, maybe take another look at it again, especially at the clip we're seeing people switch payroll providers, right? Going from Paycor, Paylocity, Pay whoever, is that you're doing all these feeds correctly.
Yeah, either change it in your provider or the 401k plan documents that are on a pre-approved document, they have to be restated every 6 years. That's a great opportunity to review those provisions. Go, okay, are we still liking what we have, and are we still understanding what we have? Because this is a great time to change it, to review it, is during those 6-year restatements.
Yeah, this is just a thing. Make sure you're communicating with people and saying that you're using the same definition in both cases. 55 minutes, and this is where I think where we're going to round out today. There's a lot of information, I'm sure, but hopefully all of you picked up 1 or 2 things that might help you look at your plan a little bit better. 5,500, really, I think everyone on this call is going to know what the 5,500 is, right? Your year-end tax document. One thing a lot of people don't understand is, why can't I just get a DocuSign for this? Or why am I getting some link from my provider that doesn't take me to my provider, but instead pushes me out to the DOL? And that's just because those are the regulatory requirements, right? 5,500 documents either have to be wet signed or you have to use the DOL's eFast website. There isn't another option where your record keeper can just do this for you, right? It's going to have to be somebody who's authorized at the plan signing the tax document. And this always gets done because providers will just hound you until you do it, right? But like the fines for this stuff, this is where it gets significant, right? If you're late filing your 5,500, right? We're talking about possibly thousands, $2,500 a day. I mean, a smaller plan, they might whittle that down a little, but ignorance isn't always a justification, right? We've seen small plans that didn't do their 5,500, assumed their TPA was doing it, and they're still getting fines of upwards of $10,000-12,000. So,
and what adds on to that, I mean, I think it was Secure 1.0 where they increased fees from $25 a day to $250 a day, which is a multiplier of 10x. But if you're on extension, your 5,500 you think is due October 15th instead of July 31st. If you file it on October 17th and it's 2 days late, they will assess penalties back to July 31st, the original deadline. So your 2-day late return now has 2.5 months of $250 a day. And that's just for the IRS late fee. The DOL has their own late fee as well. When you're filing late, if you're not using one of their delinquent filing programs, before you get a notice of whatnot, their late notices are going to come out of the gate strong with these heavy fees. So make sure you do them, or if you're doing it under the delinquent program, which is a separate topic, you need to do it before you get a late notice, or you're no longer eligible for that. So stay on top of those deadlines. Like you said, Brandon, you're probably going to get hit with reminders and notices anyway, but that's the importance of that. Please don't disregard them because it's like 3 weeks out from now. So yeah, this is a very timely slide.
A little bit of changes to the 5,500. I just want everyone to be aware of. I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty of this, just I think due to time, but there are changes to 5,500s that have happened, specifically how we're defining who a participant is. Prior to these changes in 2023, a participant was considered anyone eligible for the plan, even if they're not receiving employer contributions or making their own deferrals, plus anyone who had a balance. So that means so many plans had a really big number of people, quote unquote, participants, and that would push them over that 120 qualification to mean they're using the full form 5,500 and now have to go through that kind of painful audit process and that expensive audit process. They're trying to make it simpler, specifically just due to the resources of the DOL, like Mike's saying, right? And the new definition is it's anyone with a balance, right? That could be an active employee or a termed, but for most plans, that means they're going to have a much better chance of being short form 5,500 versus the full form 5,500, and therefore they don't have to go into the audit. So right now, this is the best time ever to talk to your TPA about this, your account manager, your record keeper, or if your advisor talks about this side of the fence too, about doing force outs, right? And getting your numbers down, because it might be one of the first chances you have to get under the audit thresholds or stay under them finally, if you're a growing company. So this is definitely something you should be talking to your consultants about, but we want to see if at all possible, get you under 100 lives on that thing so we can, audits are expensive. Yeah.
And that came about as well with the long-term part-time employees. You all these part-timers that would otherwise be ineligible, now they're getting brought in. Folks were freaking out, going, now I'm going to be subject to an audit. And they're going, okay, let's figure out. Now you're only going to be subject to an audit if you have that many people with account balances. So if you all of a sudden with these long-term part-time employees have 150 more eligible employees, but no one is actually participating, that's not pushing you into that audit threshold. So that was a little bit of negotiation there. They also, to your point, Brandon, about forcing out folks with small account balances, they finally raised that threshold that they hadn't touched in years from 5,000 to 7,000. So make sure your plan is amended to pick up that increase. But with the new rules, if your plan is amended, your folks with less than $7,000 in their accounts, if they're terminated, they can be forced out to an IRA, and that'll help bring down your participant counts so that you can, stay out of that audit threshold if maybe you're like right near the cusp of it.
And I mean, last note, advisors, TPAs, record keepers, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to constantly monitor your participant count on a daily or a monthly basis. This is really going to fall down to the payroll specialists, the HR benefits specialists, controllers of companies, that if you're getting close to 100 people and it's September right now, reach out to people and talk about this force out, because it's not going to be a proactive conversation with most consultants. It's just not a barometer a lot of us are able to monitor. Really, TPAs, record keepers, they're more reactive, right? If you yourself are probably gonna have to be proactive if you're worried about crossing this 100 life mark pretty soon, or participant mark. So reach out to people, especially right now. Q3 is when you want to do it because you want them out before 1/1. All right, so that was a lot. We really appreciate all of you being here today. I'm glad we could provide you some SHRM credits for those of you who are members of that association. Really, top level here. Remember your contribution deadlines. Those are based upon your historic contribution practices. Late contributions, remember that. Make it as soon as possible, right? Don't try to figure out your correction. Don't reach out to your attorney, your record keeper, whoever. Just go ahead and make that missed contribution. If you don't know how to do that, obviously then contact the record keeper. They will talk you through how doing a one-off deferral file, right? You don't have to figure that out yourself. Plan notices, make sure you know who's delivering what, and ask what can be taken off of your plate, because I know a lot of you already have a lot there right now. And then eligible compensation, just make sure you understand that your definition of compensation matches that of the plan. I think we're probably going to skip Q&A today just due to the amount of time. But if anyone has any questions here for either Mike or myself, you can reach out to retirement@arcwood.com, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that this presentation might have brought up, or anything that might be going on with your plan. Just let us know that you watched this presentation. It's called Arcwood Mastery Session on 401k compliance, and let us know if you had the question for Mike or myself. And again, that email is retirement@arcwood.com. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.